right, we have Ini Jamaka with the details of what's playing out in the global economy. Good to have you, Ini.
Good to be here, Laddie. Thank you so much. Let's just go straight into it, and we start from the UK, where the economy grew 0.3%. Remember, yesterday, as part of the outlook for the week, we're expecting GDP. So 0.3% in the April to June period of this year, according to the National Statistics Office, unrevised from the ONS initial estimate. So that's it. The economy in the United Kingdom grew 0.3% for that period. We move over to France, where inflation picked up on an acceleration in the services sector and smaller declines in energy prices, though it remained well below the European Central Bank's 2% target. Consumer prices in the euro area's second largest economy rose 1.1% from a year ago. This is in a September statement that was shared. And quickly move to currencies reacting to that threat of a shutdown, U.S. government shutdown. The deadline is today. We see that the U.S. dollar wobbled on Tuesday. Investors are braced for it. Meanwhile, the USD gained 0.49%. You know, of course, as the dollar depreciates, other currencies gain against it. And still coming from the United States, the U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is supporting a one-year extension of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, that's AGOA, that trade initiative. It ends today, also expires today, September 30, but according to White House official, that will be extended by 1 year, and we'll see what that happens even after that. And then we move to China. While the United States has introduced fees on that workers' visa, and that might be discouraging a lot of companies from bringing in expert trade, China has a new visa program, and it's aimed at attracting foreign tech talent, and it kicks off this week, a move seen to boost Beijing's fortunes in its geopolitical rivalry with Washington, as a new U.S. visa policy prompts would-be applicants to scramble for alternative. Let's settle in China now. We have Ken Kao. He's an investor and global markets commentator, joins us from Tokyo to share his thoughts on this. Hi, Ken. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So it does seem like China does the opposite of what the U.S. is doing, for instance, in this issue of the visa. And we've seen the not-so-friendly relationship when it comes to the trade tariffs. From where you stay, what do you observe in the movement of China, the trend of decision-making when it comes to trade, global trade?
Well, I think China is still pursuing a mercantilist trade policy. In other words, accumulating as much trade surplus as possible, in a process building up its foreign exchange reserves. So China, in my opinion, is the main source of global trade imbalance. And I think Donald Trump is correct in identifying this problem, but I doubt that his approach will be successful, because what we've seen from the first trade war during the first Trump administration is that what China responded is by cheapening its currency, by undervaluing Chinese yuan to offset any increase in tariffs. So several years later, despite what the West has tried to achieve by correcting this trade imbalance, China is still running record trade surplus, and this imbalance is still persisting to this day.
So what do you think would be a long-term approach, especially for China, in handling the situation? Because it doesn't seem like President Donald Trump is going to relax in using tariff as an instrument.
I think ultimately what's going to correct this situation is not going to from the outside force. It's going to be from the Chinese leadership when they realize that they need to boost domestic consumption in order to create sustainable economic growth. That is when the change will happen. China has been talking about reducing its reliance on exports and boosting domestic consumption for years, but there's a very little traction in that area. I think one of the main problems is that the Chinese Communist Party needs to loosen its grip on the private sector and be willing to reduce the state role in the economy and have the consumption, private consumption, as a higher share of the Chinese economy. But the problem is that when they transition to domestic consumption, the Chinese state will have less foreign exchange reserves to invest abroad in projects like Belt and Road Initiative. So that weakens the role the Chinese state plays, but it will give Chinese consumers more purchasing power, and that will create less frustration for Western policymakers about this trade imbalance.
So Ken, you don't think that China is on the right path, because we see something that looks like a scramble for the African market, both from the US and China. I don't think that's a way to go for China.
Well, I think China is doing a lot of things correct. I'm not denying everything they have done over the past 30, 40 years since they loosened the grip on the private market and Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up. But this model is just not sustainable. The Chinese consumers are not benefiting from the Chinese economy's growth. A lot of the growth, I would say the majority of the growth, accrues to the Chinese state. The Chinese state is doing very well. They're influencing policymakers around the globe, and they're building infrastructure projects around the globe. But those infrastructure projects are not really benefiting the local communities. They're hiring Chinese state-owned companies and Chinese engineers and construction workers to build these projects. And a lot of those projects, when it comes to a cost-benefit analysis, are not efficient. They're building bridges to nowhere, and in the process, a lot of foreign countries get heavily indebted because of these projects. So they have to pay interest on these projects, and their local residents are not really reaping the benefits because a lot of these projects are not supported by practical consideration. But a few local officials could still benefit by collaborating with the Chinese money. But the question is, does it benefit these foreign countries as a whole?
All right, Ken, thank you so much for that analysis. And of course, knowing that you are from China, so I guess we can understand where you're coming from. Ken Kao is an investor and global markets commentator.
Thank you.
All right, so Ladi, I think it's good to have a Chinese person give, well, hopefully an objective perspective. So while we are celebrating the Belt and Road Initiative, which China is coming to Africa to improve infrastructural development, you know, the Chinese are not so happy. They say it's not benefiting the Chinese, the local and the domestic economy. You know, so I mean, so while you guys are celebrating here in Africa and looking at how U.S. and China, they're trying,
trickling down to the micro.
I'm telling you,
right
so
there in China.
It's good to have the perspective of someone, who's feeling it back there on the other side of the continent, while we are receiving the infrastructure development funding here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Annie, for the details there of what's playing out in the global economy. All right, so that's the show today. Thanks so much for watching. We're back again at 1:30 with what's playing out with the markets that we track. Thank you for watching. I'm Ladi Williams. Bye for now.